Hey, welcome back, Sci-Getters. Nope, doesn't feel right. Some of you who pay attention to the community tab know that I just got married and consequently also went on my honeymoon. So, yay me. We traveled to the tropical and scenic Sandpiper Bay in Florida, where we spent quite a bit of our time laying out by the pool, sipping mimosas, pinacoladas, cheap whiskey. What? We weren't going to pay for top shelf at an all-inclusive resort, but I did end up paying for top shelf. Anyway, and hanging out with birds that wanted to steal our cake. Overall, great time. We definitely want to go back next year, except for one thing. We flew there, and it turns out I'm terrified of flying. Mostly the taking off and landing bits, but really anytime there's turbulence too. So my morbid ass started thinking about how likely it was that we were going to perish on that plane ride. And we're going to talk about the subject while it is fresh on my mind. So, happy Halloween, I guess. But before we jump in, be sure to do the thing and like, comment, subscribe, and join the mailing list, unless you want me to clothesline you in the face. I'm Eric Malachite, author of the third book of Seleniar's Enigma that you can't read yet because I'm still writing it. And this is Science Get. In 2018, a window cracked aboard a Newark, New Jersey-bound Southwest Airlines flight, forcing it to make an emergency landing in Cleveland, Ohio. While the incident was injury-free, it came 1 week after another Southwest 737 suffered a critical engine failure. And by failure, I mean the thing tore itself apart, shattering a window and killing a female passenger who got sucked right out of the plane. In 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 disappeared somewhere off the coast of Southeast Asia, and to this day, it's not known what exactly happened to it. Originally, it was suspected that the plane crashed over the South China Sea, but later the search focused on the southern Indian Ocean, as it was revealed that the plane had gone off course. The theories for the cause of its disappearance are numerous, including hijacking and even a hypoxia event. More on that later. Just last year, Air India Express Flight 1344, an international flight scheduled to fly from Dubai to Kozhikode, India, was forced to abort 2 landing attempts due to heavy rain and tailwind. On the third landing attempt, the aircraft made contact with the runway and ended up skidding and sliding down runways 9 through 10, killing 18 passengers and both pilots. Though thankfully 4 cabin crew members and 165 passengers survived. Now, there are quite a few other incidents that I could list here, but I'm sure I've caused more than a few of you to reconsider flying in the near future with these 4 alone, or at the very least avoid Southwest, Air India, and Malaysia Airlines. But, getting down to it, what are the real odds that you will die in a plane crash? Well, to put this in perspective, according to the National Safety Council, or NSC, the odds of dying in a car crash are 1 in 107. That means that throughout your entire lifespan, you have 0.9% chance of dying in a car crash. And yet, the chance of dying because of heart disease is 16.7%, and your chance of dying from cancer is 14.9%. So when I say that your chance of dying while on a plane is 1 in 205,552, again, according to the NSC, you'll know that death aboard an airplane is highly unlikely. That includes all types of planes, including small twin-engine models and private jets, as well as the large commercial ones. Interestingly enough, the odds of dying in a plane crash or in an accident aboard a plane are 1 in 29.4 million. Wow, Superman was right. Air travel really is the safest way to fly. Thanks, Superman. Okay, so those statistics are all well and good and probably won't help my anxiety during takeoff and landing, but if your plane does end up crashing, fingers crossed that it doesn't, how likely are you to survive? My wife said something funny to me while we were flying over parts of the Atlantic Ocean on our way back to Virginia from our honeymoon. Our flight had been delayed multiple times due to thunderstorms and nasty wind speeds, presumably, at our destination. Thunderstorms can prove to be hazardous to airplanes, so typically, airlines will simply avoid them or delay flights until they've run their course. So even after most of them had passed, imagine my lack of enthusiasm as I continued to see thunderstorms out the window of our plane. I told my new wife that I get nervous during takeoff and landing, despite knowing that the odds of dying in a crash are extremely low. And she laughed and said something to the effect of, "You know how massive the universe is, how unbelievably big it is, and aren't afraid of that, yet you're nervous about flying." And yeah, she's kind of right. That's a little funny. But here's the thing, I'm not afraid of the infinite vastness of our universe because I'm not out getting lost in it. If I were on a spaceship, you can bet I'd be considering the odds of getting sucked out in an airlock and drifting aimlessly through space for the rest of my not-so-lengthy life. The fear doesn't come from a place of rationality, or at least not totally. It comes from knowing that humans screw up, and pretty often, might I add. Okay, to put it more simply, it's just the fear of the unknown. Thanks, Lovecraft. Douglas Adams once said, "The fact that we live at the bottom of a deep gravity well, on the surface of a gas-covered planet going around a nuclear fireball 90 million miles away, and think this to be normal is obviously some indication of how skewed our perspective tends to be. The fact that we can make giant mechanical contraptions like this is incredible, but we're still very flawed, and there are contributing factors that can lead to accidents in the air, such as cracks in windows, poor maintenance, possibly due to a lack of personnel to conduct safety checks, engine cracks, wear and tear, as well as other factors like extreme weather. These are all things I consider when I step onto a plane, yet the odds of surviving a plane crash are actually more than 95%. Yeah, that's pretty good. And when you consider Wikipedia's list of all the plane crashes, as well as all the lost aircraft over aviation's relatively short history, and compare that to the number of land-based vehicles that end up crashing on a daily basis, that really puts things into perspective. But speaking of statistics, there are a lot of misconceptions around flying that we've simply got to put to bed. Turbulence is a major concern for nervous flyers, this one included. It's hard not to be slightly nervous when the plane starts to shake about, especially when so many Hollywood films have used it as a means to a cheap thrill. But it turns out that turbulence is totally normal. It's just the cost of flight. The Earth's atmosphere is just not uniform. There are plenty of variations in airspeed, direction, and even air density. Lots of pilots like to compare our atmosphere to water. And like the ocean has varying currents and conditions, the atmosphere has pockets of air that move in different directions. If you've ever tried to kayak on choppy water, you know it's a lot harder than doing so in calmer waters. And don't even get me started on paddleboarding, mainly because I suck at it. But another source of misconception is that engine failure automatically leads to a crash. This is another thing that Hollywood likes to present. An engine explodes, and then the plane just goes into a spin. But as a pilot who was invited to write a guest post for FlightDeckFriend.com points out, even a plane with a single engine can safely reach their destination. You might be thinking that a plane with only a single engine would cause the plane to start spinning out of control, but the rudder and ailerons are designed to counteract this effect. If this weren't the case, then commercial airlines would be at risk of rolling over in a scenario like this. In fact, something to keep in mind while flying is that even if a plane loses all of its engines in the course of a flight, it can travel up to 60 miles, 96.5 kilometers, without the aid of its engines. What, wings allow things to glide? No way! Air pressure damage is another thing. In films like Air Force One and Final Destination, it's presented that if enough damage is done to a plane, then this could cause a hole to be ripped in the plane's hull, or for the pressurized door to be ripped open. And this simply isn't the case. Though, as mentioned earlier, problems can occur if the windows are cracked or end up breaking on a plane. But there really isn't enough of a difference in pressure to cause that vacuum effect that we often see in movies. As with the Southwest flight that had to make an emergency landing in Ohio, no one died when the windows shattered. That's because after a few moments and the initial rush of air, the air pressure equalizes. Airplane doors are also humanly impossible to open in the middle of a flight, especially at 30,000 feet. No, I haven't tried it. This is thanks to the difference in pressure between the outside and the interior of the aircraft. For someone to be able to open one of these pressurized doors, they would need to be able to exert enough force to move 24,000 pounds of pressure. And you know, we're not Superman. Wait. Could even Superman do that? A silly question. And for those of you thinking that at low altitudes you could open the door no problem, think again, because you'd still have to be able to move 1,100 pounds of pressure against each square foot of the door. Ironically, engineers point out that if you really wanted to open something on an aircraft, you should just target the windows instead. However, when it comes to rapid decompression, hypoxia is something of a concern there. Hypoxia is a condition that occurs when the body lacks sufficient oxygen in the blood, tissue, or cells to maintain normal function. This can happen when breathing air in areas with reduced barometric pressure, malfunctioning oxygen equipment at altitude, pneumonia, drowning, and in extreme environmental temperatures. Typically, hypoxia can be caused while flying a non-pressurized aircraft above 10,000 feet without any supplemental oxygen. It can also be caused by pressurization system malfunction, oxygen system malfunction, and of course, rapid decompression. The dangerous thing about this is that symptoms can often show up gradually, affecting a pilot's behavior before they even realize it, though this is admittedly a rare occurrence. Segue, lightning is probably the last misconception I'll mention, although there are a ton of others worth mentioning at some point as well. Speaking of Superman, a famous scene in the Superman movies, comics, and animated shows involves a lightning bolt destroying the engine of an airplane, only for Superman to come in and guide the plane to safety. Just fly. Don't look. Just fly. Deep. Okay. This, it turns out, would be totally unnecessary, since planes are practically lightning-proof. Since the disaster of Pan Am Boeing 707 in 1962 that involved a lightning strike causing a fuel tank to explode, aircraft moving forward from that event have been designed to withstand a lightning strike. Now, you might see a bright flash of light and hear a loud boom, but this would amount to little else than a light show. The reason for this being that planes are designed to become part of the lightning bolt's path to the ground, which is pretty freaking cool if you ask me. Without getting into too much detail, the lightning bolt will latch onto one of the plane's extremities, such as the nose or the wingtip, and as the plane flies through it, it becomes part of the electrical circuit between the lightning bolt and the clouds that feature opposite polarity. There's more to it than that. But because of this design, it's extremely unlikely for a lightning bolt to fry essential systems aboard a plane. But as a hypothetical... Man, I did not miss you, computer. But hypothetically, what if your plane crashes on land or sea? What are some things that you can do to ensure your own survival? Let's find out. It's probably pretty easy to think that if your plane ends up going down from a height of 30,000 feet, you'll be 15 kinds of screwed. But that isn't the case. The National Transportation Safety Board analyzed airline accidents from 1983 to 2000 and found that the survival rate of passengers in those cases was 95.7%. In fact, even in serious cases involving fire and substantial damage, 76.6% of passengers were still able to survive. But what's really interesting about this is that the NTSB found that most of the fatalities that occurred during incidents could have been prevented if those passengers had taken appropriate action. So what can you do to ensure your survival, or at the very least increase your odds of living through a plane crash? One thing is that you've got 90 seconds to get the hell out of that plane. Understanding that, according to the NTSB, is absolutely crucial to your survival in a scenario like this. If you survive an airplane crash, then you have a fairly decent chance of living, as long as you can escape the plane within 90 seconds. Most often, the thing that kills passengers is that they hesitate to do anything once the crash has happened. In most cases, they never unbuckle their safety restraints due to shock, which is more than a little understandable. But in other cases, it's because they're waiting on instructions from the crew. On the whole, passengers seem to underestimate how quickly a fire can spread through a plane. In fact, surveys suggest that most passengers believe that they have 30 minutes to get out of a burning plane. But those 90 seconds are all it takes for the fire to consume the entire plane, including burning through the main fuselage and its passengers. The other tip is that typically people who aren't physically fit and in good health don't survive. Young, slender men have the best odds of surviving a plane crash. And older, overweight women have the worst odds. It's also suggested that you should fly in bigger planes if possible. If you've got a choice, that is. The reason for this is because larger planes have more energy absorption in a crash than something of a smaller size, which means that you'll be subjected to less deadly force. But in addition to that, despite recent troubles with Southwest, the NTSB suggests flying with them rather than regional carriers. The reason being that national carriers have a much lower accident rate than their regional counterparts. Southwest also has a fleet that is only made up of 737s. Regional carriers also have a problem with younger, less experienced pilots, not to mention the fact that they're overworked, especially now. You will also probably want to sit within 5 rows of an exit, because if you don't, you will have a reduced likelihood of escaping. Pick those window seats, kids. In addition to reading the safety card and listening to the flight crew, there are a few other things to remember. If your flight goes down over the sea, you're more likely to survive if you get inside a raft. Passengers who end up treading water are likely to get fatigued after a few hours, and are a lot more likely to be targeted by sharks, although shark attacks at sea are less likely than some people think. In the case of sea-based crashes, being physically fit is still definitely a factor, because your limits will be tested greatly after drifting on the open seas, and food and water is an entirely different story, which could make for a whole other video on its own. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see that in the future. But most crucial to your survival is to pay attention and be ready to act, especially during the first 3 minutes during takeoff and the last 8 minutes before landing. According to flight crash investigations, nearly 80% of all plane crashes occur during these 2 time windows. Between those times, a plane crash is highly unlikely. Being alert during these 2 time periods could save your life if the unlikely occurs. But in addition to this, survival tips also include not sleeping, ensuring shoes are secure and tight. If you're a woman, wear flats instead of high heels. Running in stilettos is probably a bad idea. Don't get drunk before you get on the plane, and have an action plan. And lastly, if the oxygen mask drops, put it on immediately. Following these tips and more will increase your chances of survival. And that's math. And math does not lie. Math! If you dug this content, drop me a like, comment down below, and hey, if you dig weather content, check out this video on these rare lightning events called elves. And hey, check out all those wonderful names. Thank you, patrons. I'm Eric Malachite, and I'll see you next time. Welcome back. Math!